Every week, I go to a club, and every week, I act like I'm too drunk to stand. And every week, a nice guy like you comes over to see if I'm okay.
What did I do? Nothing. No, I meant you did. You did nothing. You did nothing for yourself. You did nothing for them. And in my opinion, there's a real special place in hell reserved for people that just choose to do nothing.
Look, when you get that drunk, things happen. Don't get blackout drunk all the time and then expect people to be on your side when you have sex with someone you don't want to.
Who do you think you are? You are no different from the peasants our soldiers have their way with when they are at war. Do they complain?
None of us want to admit when we've made ourselves vulnerable, when we've made a bad choice. And those choices, those mistakes, can be so damaging and really regrettable.
It's every guy's worst nightmare getting accused like that.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
And despite my protestations and my revulsion, did I go crying to my lord? I had better things to worry about. No, I stood up, got on with my life.
But at what cost?
Hi everyone, it's Alona from editing. So while you can see a spoiler warning on the screen, I also wanted to mention a few things. This video was originally recorded in Ukrainian, so the parts where you see my face have been dubbed using AI to match the lip sync. However, whenever possible, I re-recorded parts using my natural voice. I got a new mic recently, so I'm very happy about it. And also because in previous videos, some of you commented that you actually liked hearing my real voice, even with an accent and stuff like that. So I just wanted to say thank you for your support, because a few months ago I honestly didn't think I'd be able to comfortably and confidently make videos in English, but your feedback really motivated me. Also, my friend and I decided that from now on we will be making videos in both languages, Ukrainian and English, so in future videos whenever you hear voiceover it will be my real voice, and when you see my face the video will be fully recorded in English as well. I still have one or two older videos that were originally filmed in Ukrainian, and I'm considering using AI to translate and dub those, but we will see. I just wanted to be transparent about all of this because it's important to me that people know I'm not trying to trick anyone with AI or anything like that. I just want to make the best videos I can, honestly. And with that being said, thank you for your support again, for your feedback, and let's get to the video.
Sexual violence is a real and painful problem all over the world. Historically, it is difficult to determine exactly when the first act of sexual violence by one person against another occurred. However, rape has been documented in the oldest records of humanity, both as a practice and as a social problem, often associated with wars, conquests, and the subjugation of people, especially women. Cinema as a tool has always reflected the deepest traumas of society, and few subgenres portray this as vividly as rape and revenge films.
These stories, often brutal and grounded in reality, raise questions about the nature of violence, power dynamics, and justice. But what do these films really say about revenge, about sexual violence, and how do they portray the women at the center of it all? Hi everyone, my name is Alona Shilova and you're watching Femme Fatale Heals channel, where we talk about women, film, and women in film.
In this video, we will be talking about a subgenre in film known as rape and revenge movies, and how these films portray women's experiences in stories about sexual violence. In this video, we will not be showing actual scenes of violence against women, but we will be discussing their content and examining them from a critical perspective. So if these topics are triggering or difficult for you, it's better to watch other videos on our channel. They are lighter, but no less interesting. Some of the earliest recorded cases of sexual violence in human history date back to as early as 1754 BC. These were Mesopotamian texts, specifically the Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest known legal codes in history.
It addressed sexual violence, showing that even ancient societies recognized rape as a distinct crime, with legal consequences. However, the punishments often reflected property rights rather than personal harm.
Greek mythology is also closely linked to rape. One of the most famous myths tells the story of Medusa the Gorgon.
In the myth, Medusa was a beautiful young woman and a priestess in the temple of Athena. According to one version of the myth, she was raped by Poseidon inside the temple. Enraged, Athena didn't punish Poseidon. Instead, she cursed Medusa, transforming her into a gorgon with snakes for hair and gaze that turned anyone who looked at her to stone. Later, Medusa was killed by the hero Perseus, who used her severed head as a weapon.
In recent years, Medusa's story has been reinterpreted, and she has become a symbol of female resilience and survival after trauma. Her transformation is seen as a metaphor for how society often punishes victims of violence rather than their attackers. Women who have experienced sexual violence have even started using tattoos of the Medusa Gorgon as a symbol of their resilience. So, considering how deeply sexual violence is rooted in human history and culture, it is not surprising that reflections of this experience eventually began to appear in art. Long before the emergence of cinema as a cultural phenomenon, there were already examples of women reinterpreting their own experiences of sexual violence and expressing them through art. One of the first female figures in this regard was the artist Elisabetta Sirani and her painting Timoclea killing her rapist. Sirani was born in 1638 and was the first Italian female artist in early modern Bologna. She managed her father's workshop, where she opened a painting school for women which had about 20 students, including her youngest sisters. Both her father's workshop and the school thrived under Sirani's leadership, and in her works, she often chose subjects that highlighted the strength of woman's spirit. The painting Timoclea killing her rapists was no exception. Timoclea killing her rapists is a popular tale described in the biography of Alexander the Great. During Alexander's invasion of Thebes, a captain of his army rapes the noblewoman Timoclea. After the assault, the captain asks the woman where she hides her money. Timoclea leads the captain to her garden well, but when he leans over to look inside, she pushes him in and throws heavy stones into the well until he dies. In Sirani's painting, it's hard not to notice how the artist literally turns the story and hierarchy upside down. The rapist is depicted upside down, in a helpless position, while Timoclea stands resolutely over him. Like many Baroque painters, Sirani had a flair for drama, but it is worth noting that for the most part, paintings of this story depict the aftermath of the brutal event.
For example, after killing the captain, Timoclea stands before Alexander to receive his judgment, often depicted with her children beside her.
In other words, the focus was not on Timoclea's action but on Alexander, who chose not to punish the woman. Sirani, however, decided to highlight justice for Timoclea rather than Alexander's mercy. While in Renaissance, Armenian women were often objectified or idealized, Sirani chose to depict a woman who takes control of her own life. Therefore, the painting Timoclea killing her rapist can be considered one of the first works of art to make a statement about female resilience and the possibility of justice, themes that were rarely explored in the art of that period. Another important example is the artist Artemisia Gentileschi and her painting Judith beheading Holofernes.
Artemisia was born in Rome in 1593 and was raised by her father, the painter Orazio Gentileschi. She trained alongside her three brothers in her father's workshop, where she proved to be the most talented of all his children.
When Artemisia was 17 years old, she was raped by the artist Agostino Tassi. In 1612, the infamous trial took place, during which Artemisia was subjected to exhausting torture and interrogations.
The young woman was forced to endure the public shame of a trial, where she was made to testify under torture. Interestingly, every word from that trial case has been preserved in the official transcript.
This document still exists and is over 400 years old, and from it one can learn more about the testimony of Gentileschi herself and those who accused her. In this text, Artemisia's account of how Agostino attacked her has been preserved. These are honest and straightforward testimonies about how he used physical force against her and committed sexual violence. At the same time, during the torture at the trial, Gentileschi kept repeating that her testimony about the rape was true, and she never retracted her words. Tassi was found guilty, but his punishment was never carried out, as the artist was released thanks to the intervention of the Pope. The story of her rape has shaped the way art historians talk about Artemisia, especially the explicitly violent scenes in which a strong woman is the main heroine.
In Artemisia Gentileschi's painting Judith beheading Holofernes, we are presented with another dramatic scene in which an ordinary woman defeats a powerful man. The biblical Judith and her maidservant attack their victim, the Syrian general Holofernes. As Judith cuts through his neck with a sword, his face is contorted in agony, while Judith appears strikingly detached. Her expression is tense with determination, in contrast to Caravaggio's version, where Judith's face shows disgust and hesitation rather than revenge.
Many researchers believe that Gentileschi's own experience with sexual violence shaped her approach to depicting this brutal story. Perhaps Gentileschi's Judith was a way for the artist to portray the very justice that had been denied to her. When it comes to the earliest examples of films that belong to the rape and revenge subgenre, these are often stories told from a male perspective.
The most well-known example is the 1960 film The Virgin Spring, directed by Ingmar Bergman. The story takes place in medieval Sweden. A young girl named Karin is raped and murdered by a group of herdsmen. Later, while looking for shelter, they unknowingly arrive at the home of the girl's father, the man whose daughter they had just killed. The rest of the film centers on the father's grief and his path to revenge.
The Virgin Spring also presents one of the earliest tropes that has become popular in stories involving sexual violence, where violence against a woman is used to motivate a male character.
Karin is mostly portrayed as an innocent and passive heroine, a sacrificial lamb whose death serves as a moral and narrative catalyst for the men around her.
The film depicts her rape and murder with stark realism, but does not delve into a psychological analysis of this trauma for women.
The focus quickly shifts to how the father realizes the death of his daughter and his father's actions. Similar optics can be seen in the 1972 film The Last House on the Left. In the story, two teenage girls are kidnapped, raped, and murdered by criminals. But later, the criminals take refuge in the house of one of the girls, where her parents find out about the crime and take brutal revenge.
In concept, this film is very similar to The Virgin Spring.
Although The Last House on the Left does include the perspective of the murdered girl's mother, her role doesn't receive the same attention as the father's. Her grief and rage add emotional depth to the story, but the father remains the central figure. His journey and his revenge are framed as the main narrative focus.
However, The Virgin Spring and The Last House on the Left still differ in how the filmmakers portray revenge from a moral standpoint. As author Alexandra Heller-Nicholas writes in her book Rape Revenge Films,
The Virgin Spring and The Last House on the Left diverge not over the treatment of sexual assault as much as they do in regards to the morality of the revenge act by victims' agents. While the 1972 film, unlike The Virgin Spring, may appear at first to have no moral center, Craven's rejection of a happily ever after universe is an ethical statement in its own right. The message of The Last House on the Left may be bleaker than Bergman's, but it says much of the film's ideological zeitgeist. In this world, revenge is futile and can only be rewarded with chaos and despair. In The Last House on the Left, violence begets more violence, and an assumption that good will triumph over evil has been exposed as naive in the world in which it is set.
Interestingly, in stories about rape and revenge, it is women who are the victims of sexual violence. There are some isolated cases in cinema where the victims of rape are men who then seek revenge. For example, this subplot appears in Pulp Fiction.
You okay? Nah, man. I'm pretty fucking far from okay.
But these are still rare instances that are not central to the overall plot of the film.
I was able to find one example where male sexual assault and revenge form the core of the narrative in the 1972 film Deliverance. The film includes a scene in which one of the male characters, Bobby, is sexually assaulted by another man during a canoe trip in the wilderness. Later, the surviving characters seek revenge on their attackers.
I think that such a gap between the depiction of rape against women and men has two reasons. The first is that women are more often victims of sexual violence in the real world. For example, according to UNICEF data alone, in 2024, more than 370 million girls and women alive today have experienced rape or sexual violence before the age of 18. This is every 8th woman in the world.
Secondly, male sexual assault is still a highly taboo topic in our society and is unfortunately often portrayed as something shameful. There are a lot of examples in modern films where male-on-male sexual violence is treated as a joke, as something to laugh at. This is often tied to how much violence is framed as a power dynamic, one man being shown as less masculine, weaker, while the other asserts dominance and control over him.
However, the earliest example that closely resembles what we now call a rape and revenge film is
I Spit on Your Grave 1978, directed by Mary Zarki, tells the story of a woman named Jennifer Hills, a New York-based fiction writer who takes revenge on each of her tormentors after being raped by 4 men and left to die.
The film itself presents a controversial depiction of violence, particularly highlighted by a lengthy rape scene that takes up a full 30 minutes of screen time.
The director was accused of exploiting the depiction of violence against a woman, rather than portraying the survivor's traumatic experience. The camera often lingers on Jennifer's body in ways that objectify her, reinforcing the male gaze through the story. That's why I Spit on Your Grave is difficult to view as a story of female empowerment.
Criticism regarding the objectification and sexualization of the female body in rape and revenge plots is widespread. Other examples include the 1973 film Thriller, A Cruel Picture, which contains graphic rape scenes, or The Hills Have Eyes from 1977, in which the scenes of violence are also exploitative. The main problem with such scenes is often said to be that they are created for the pleasure of a male audience. The camera lingers on the woman's body in a way that emphasizes her vulnerability and creates sexuality where there is none. This approach turns scenes of sexual violence into shock and spectacle, rather than reflecting the traumatic and terrifying experience of a woman.
One of the more positive examples among older films that explore the theme of rape and revenge is Miss 45, 1981, directed by Abel Ferrara. The story centers on Thana, a mute young woman working as a seamstress in New York City. After surviving 2 brutal rapes in a short span of time, she embarks on a violent spree, systematically targeting men she perceives as threatening.
45 Caliber is an interesting example because this film has been both praised for its representation of the female experience and criticized for a certain degree of sexualization.
One of the film's strengths is the realistic portrayal of Thana's transformation from a victim into an avenger. Her quest for revenge is not just about physical retribution, it's also about reclaiming her power after experiencing deep trauma.
Additionally, Thana herself is an atypical heroine for this subgenre.
Her silent and seemingly fragile demeanor makes her an unconventional protagonist in a genre typically defined by hyper-masculine and violent figures. The film explores how rape and violence can affect every aspect of a person's life, reshaping a woman's sense of herself and her relationship with the world around her. It doesn't romanticize Thana's revenge, but rather present it as a response from a fractured psyche, a woman pushed to the edge by the relentless victimization.
In fact, it is a rare depiction of the psychological consequences of sexual violence, something not often seen in cinema, especially in those years. In the aforementioned book Rape Revenge Films, Alexander Heller Nicholas writes, the success of Miss 45 is owed to its flawless use of grand mythical and symbolic elements within a gritty urban landscape. For example, much can be interpreted from Thana's name. In psychoanalysis, thanatos is a term that describes the death instinct or the drive toward destruction. Her muteness also amplifies the mythic quality of her experience. She literalizes the taboo of not disclosing rape and embodies the inability to articulate the scale of female oppression. But, more characteristic of her own story, the texture of her silence structures the 2 types of Thana that dominate the film. For Tana, the oppressed and frightened victim, her silence signifies a literal inability to speak in her own defense. However, as a femme fatale, Tana takes everything under her control, and her silence becomes a weapon. Instead of weakness, it mysteriously emphasizes the power of her physical presence.
But Miss 45 is not without its criticism. I have seen mixed reaction to the rape scene in the film. Some praised the director for focusing mostly on the protagonist's face, while others pointed out that there are still shots of her body that contribute to her objectification. For me personally, a troubling sign of is the nun's costume that protagonist wears in the finale. If you watch the series Euphoria, that's the exact character that Cat cosplays for Halloween.
Although I think it's a cool, stylish look that highlights the heroine's transformation, it's still sexualized. In other words, the heroine is still presented as an object for men's pleasure to be looked at and desired. However, in recent years, rape and revenge films have undergone what could be called a renaissance. Stories about women who take justice into their own hands are becoming increasingly popular, and we can see how these stories and their portrayals have evolved over the past decades. This mainly happened because of the Me Too movement, when women started to openly talk about their experiences of sexual violence in Hollywood, particularly at the hands of the very influential and well-known producer Harvey Weinstein. More and more stories have begun to appear in the media, told from a female perspective about women's experiences, and plots about rape and revenge have been presented to audiences from a new point of view. Probably the most popular film in this genre in recent years has been the 2020 movie Promising Young Woman, directed by Emerald Fennell. But actually, when I watched this film, it strongly reminded me of another movie that came out a few years earlier. I'm talking about the 2017 film M.f.a, directed by Natalia Leite, which has a similar plot and, in my opinion, even works better in some ways. But because the film was less popular than Promising Young Woman, it is rarely mentioned, and I think that's a shame.
So in this part of the video, I want to talk about two relatively recent films that bring a lot to the rape and revenge genre. Both films focus on a painful and relevant issue for the US, campus sexual assault. Many universities in states have small campuses communities, which has created a specific problem, a high number of sexual violence cases among students. For example, according to the latest available data from the US Department of Education's Campus Safety Survey, in 2021 there were more than 11,000 reported sexual criminal offenses across more than 10,000 campuses.
Both m.f.a. and Promising Young Woman are rooted in exactly this issue.
In m.f.a, the main character Noelle, a student at the School of Fine Arts, suffers a brutal rape and later begins taking revenge on those who exploit vulnerable women, for example at parties where heavy drinking takes place.
Promising Young Woman has a slightly different focus.
The main character Cassie drops out of medical school after her friend is raped on campus and later takes her own life. Cassie experiences something closer to survival's guilt. Though she wasn't assaulted herself, she deeply and traumatically struggles with her friend's death and what happened to her. This drives Cassie toward her own form of revenge. Every night she goes to bars pretending to be drunk, waiting for a polite man to offer help, planning to use her vulnerable state.
And after Cassie ends up at his place,
Hey. Hey. I said, what are you doing?
He's lecturing these men. Probably this is my biggest disappointment with this film, because I remember how its trailers and promotional campaign built up the expectation that Cassie literally punishes these men, meaning she kills them or destroys their lives. But to me, a serious conversation was a rather anticlimactic solution. But in m.f.a, the story is different.
In the film, Noelle literally starts killing men who rape women. Part of her motivation also comes from a video of a campus rape, where a group of boys assaulted a girl and faced no consequences.
You ever heard the saying, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind?
The world's already blind.
But I also think that Promising Young Woman does a better job of highlighting the social commentary on the topic of rape. The main character arranges separate meetings with people who, in one way or another, were involved in the violence against her friend. Among them is a former friend who says that the girl herself is to blame because she drank too much alcohol.
If you have a reputation for sleeping around, then maybe people aren't gonna believe you when you say something's happened. Look, when you get that drunk, things happen. Don't get blackout drunk all the time and then expect people to be on your side when you have sex with someone you don't want to.
and also the university dean, who says it's unfair to ruin the lives of the male students over this mistake.
You know, we get accusations like this all the time. 1 or 2 a week. None of us want to admit when we've made ourselves vulnerable, when we've made a bad choice. And those choices, those mistakes can be so damaging and really regrettable. Yes, I mean, because what would you have me do? Ruin a young man's life every time we get an accusation like this?
Essentially, the only character who truly feels remorse for what he did is the male lawyer who defended the boys in court, and he genuinely regrets it. In m.f.a, the plot overall is more art house, because after the murders, the main character channels her anger and strength into art, creating eerie and atmospheric paintings. The way Noelle uses her art serves as a form of resistance, a means to reclaim power and even turn vulnerability into strength in a world where women's voices are often marginalized. Her revenge is depicted as a form of art and challenges the traditional notion of who holds power and control in this genre. Essentially, both characters embody their own quest for justice. But despite their different approaches, the endings of these films are similar. In m.f.a, the truth eventually comes out and the main character is arrested for murder. In Promising Young Woman, the ending is more complex and provoked more ambiguous reactions. At the end of the film, Cassie carries out her meticulous plan to expose the men involved in her friend's rape, including those who aided or covered up the crime. Her revenge culminates in a meeting with Len Monroe, the man responsible for her friend's rape. However, the ending takes a tragic turn when Cassie is killed, and Al and his friends cover up the crime once again. In the final scenes, it seems that all of Cassie's efforts were in vain, as her death occurs just before law enforcement is able to uncover the truth. However, Cassie had anticipated the possibility of her own death, and the film ends with her posthumous revenge, as the police receive a clue pointing to Al and his friends' involvement in the rape and murder. This ending was mainly criticized because Cassie's death undermines the film's message about achieving justice and female empowerment. Although Cassie's posthumous revenge succeeds, some critics noted that her tragic death further emphasizes the futility of women's efforts in fighting sexual violence within a system that perpetuates it. In other words, it's as if all of the heroine's struggle was meaningless. And the film carries a grim message that women have almost no chance for justice in cases of sexual violence, that women always have to pay a high price for standing up to patriarchal systems of power.
In my mind, when I was writing it, the ending was going to be the big fuck you cathartic ending. It was never written because the moment Cassie is in that room, I realized that there is no way of honestly showing that because it's not true. I cannot imagine being in a room with a man threatening him where it plays out in any different way, no matter how much we want it to be the case.
My opinion is that Promising Young Woman and m.f.a. complement each other well, showing different aspects of the same traumatic theme. But neither film has a happy ending, which on the one hand is more realistic, but also makes you think about what modern stories about rape and revenge are actually conveying. After experiencing violence and trauma, women still end up in prison or even die.
Another recent film about rape and revenge is literally called Revenge.
This is the debut film of director Coralie Fargeat, who, by the way, recently made The Substance. And already in this film you can notice Fargeat's love for grotesque and even somewhat repulsive shots, her focus on blood, violence and the female body. And Revenge is also an interesting example of how a film made by a woman can still be criticized for sexual objectification.
The plot of Revenge is quite simple. The main character is the mistress of a married man involved in a legal business, and they are vacationing together at a desert estate with his 2 accomplices. When the man briefly leaves the house, one of his friends assaults the protagonist, while the other silently condones it. Later, the girl tries to leave the estate, but the man won't let her go. Eventually, she escapes into the desert, where the men believe they have killed her. However, she survives and begins to take revenge on them.
And from then on, the entire plot of the film is built purely on action, with the characters running around the desert, hunting each other.
So Revenge is purely a spectacle-driven film. It doesn't carry a deep message or social commentary like Promising Young Woman or m.f.a. And in fact, it is very objectifying. For most of the film, the main character wears short and a crop top, and the camera often focuses on her butt or other sexualized parts of her body. Although I appreciated that in the end of the film the man is completely naked while the woman is more fully dressed, I still can't believe that a girl who survived in a desert wouldn't at least try to cut her hair or take some more practical clothes from the man she gradually kills.
But Revenge is an interesting example of a survival action film where the main role is played by a woman, and it offers an intriguing addition to the rape and revenge film genre. At the time of writing the script for this video, one of the latest additions to the rape and revenge subgenre is the film Blink Twice by Zoe Kravitz.
The story is about Frida, a young waitress and manicurist, who, along with her friend Jess, is invited to a private island by tech billionaire Slater King. At first, the island seems like a luxurious paradise, but soon Frida discovers that the women there are being drugged with memory-erasing substances and sexually abused by Slater's wealthy guests.
I like how Klipnit Vici works with the rape and revenge genre, because this film breaks a lot of conventions. For example, I was thrilled by the scene where Frida talks to another woman on the island with whom they were supposed to be rivals. But in the end, they both realize they've ended up in a dangerous situation and decide to get out of it together.
So you don't think I'm crazy?
What's crazy is that we got onto a plane with a bunch of dudes we don't know.
I thought you all knew each other.
No. Cody just chatted me up at a coffee shop, talking about how he knew Slater King.
But Heather and Gamal, they know everybody, right?
Oh what my God. What the fuck were we thinking? Fuck!
Because in stories like this, the woman is often left alone with the threat, and hardly anyone believes her. And with this scene, Zoe Kravitz breaks the old trope. The director also took a thoughtful approach to depicting sexual violence in the film. There are almost no rape scenes in the movie, but from the fragments the audience does see, it's clear what's happening. In other words, the film doesn't exploit or even more so sexualize women's trauma, which I really appreciated.
There is a distinct symbolism in the costumes worn by the heroines. During the parties on the island, the women wear white dresses that have been specially made for them. These dresses resemble the attire of Greek statues, but also serve as a more practical purpose within the film as instruments of torture. Costume designer Kristen Hargurder has mentioned in interviews that about 70 such dresses were created for the film.
The actresses hated them so much that when the film was finished, they burned one of them. However, the ending of Klipnit Vici was also criticized. Yes, this is actually a major issue with the fact that rape and revenge films can have a great setup, but they don't always satisfy viewers in the end.
In Blink Twice, Frida comes out as a victor, ultimately using the drug against Slater himself and becoming the head of his company.
Success is the best revenge.
However, in the feminist reviews, I've seen the point that Frida's ending can be really called justice restored. Ultimately, she gains money and power for herself, but does not restore justice for the women who died on the island, including her friend Jess. Slater's crimes were never made public, otherwise his company would have been destroyed and Frida wouldn't have been able to run it. This means that no one will ever know the truth about the women's death on the island, and justice for them will never be served. Of course, I like how at the end of the film Frida sips champagne with a girl boss vibe, but I agree that her personal success and ability to punish her rapist doesn't represent a victory for all the women in the story. In 2020, the series I May Destroy You was released, created by Michaela Coel, who also starred in the lead role.
This series became known as one of the most nuanced and innovative portrayals of sexual violence and its consequences in contemporary cinema, because it focuses not only on the trauma and aftermath of sexual violence, but also on the complex and often confusing process of healing, accountability, and self-discovery. The series itself is semi-autobiographical and is based on the personal experience of Michaela Coel, who survived sexual violence.
The story centers on Arabella, a young London writer who tries to piece together the memories of a sexual assault she experienced and to understand its emotional, psychological, and social consequences.
And while I have often mentioned before that the endings in modern stories about rape and revenge are frequently criticized, in the case of I May Destroy You, it's actually the opposite. In the final episode, viewers are presented with 3 alternative versions of Arabella's encounter with her rapist David, each representing a different emotional and moral response.
The first ending is a fantasy of brutal revenge. Arabella lures David into a trap and beats him to death.
This reflects the traditional rape and revenge trope in cinema, but the moment is depicted in a surreal, almost exaggerated tone, suggesting that the heroine's emotional catharsis may be fleeting or superficial.
The second version is about compassion and forgiveness. Arabella engages in a deep and human conversation with David, which even becomes a form of relief for her rapist.
Although this version explores the possibility of understanding and forgiveness, it also highlights the emotional burden placed on victimized women when they empathize with their abusers, a concept that many consider problematic.
And the third ending is about reclaiming power. In this version, Arabella manipulates David, taking control of the situation without violence. She conquers him emotionally and psychologically, regaining her power in a way that feels more symbolic than literal.
Ultimately, in the final scenes of the series, Arabella returns to her room and continues living her life, leaving David behind.
The final act emphasizes the main idea of the series. Healing is a personal, ongoing process that doesn't depend on confronting or defeating the predator. It is a process of reclaiming autonomy and finding peace within oneself.
So it can be said that in recent years, the rape and revenge film genre has evolved significantly. Mainly because these are films that are now often told through a female perspective, by women directors themselves or by women who have experienced sexual violence. Yes, there is still room to grow and things to improve, especially the endings, but still I think this is a very positive sign, and that in the coming years there will be more and more interesting reflections and perspectives on this topic.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I will be very grateful if you give it a like and leave a comment, because I put a lot of effort into this translation and re-recording, and I'm sure you can notice that I censored a lot of words in the video, because I know YouTube is very sensitive about this topic, but I also wanted to call the things by their name. So in this case, your support and your feedback for this video will be very important. I hope more people will be able to see it and maybe find out something new. So thank you again for watching, give it a like, subscribe, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.